Journalists at their best travel the world and go to places you can't so that they can bear witness and tell the world what they've seen. Virtual reality allows the audience to go and bear witness for themselves. VR can make the news feel human and immediate and can give you a real connection to it. The news is no longer a distant academic thing. I think that's a really powerful change.
When we think about journalism, it's very much about facts, information, but it's about telling a story.
Virtual reality is the next step in journalism. It's a new visual language.
It's very powerful. It moves people's hearts, so maybe then they want to do something.
You're there on the ground. There's no guide, there's no mediator telling you what to look at.
When you have a headset on and you turn your head and you feel like you're seeing everything, that's a really fascinating idea, which is trust greater for virtual reality?
The Times published our first VR piece in November 2015, and we're really excited about this new technology. It's allowed us to take our audience inside the story in a way that we had never done before. We did a film inside Fallujah. We sent VR cameras to Fallujah with Pulitzer Prize-winning video journalist Ben Solomon.
One of the opening scenes where the Shiite militia is firing mortars at ISIS. In VR, you turn around and you see the press corps, and you see Ben, and you see his fixer, and you see the other members of the Iraqi press standing with him, and you see a guy over here smoking a cigarette, and all of a sudden you have a completely different sense for what war actually looks like, how war actually operates. We're not framing the story for you. We are letting you look around at the whole thing.
We're using the Samsung 360 camera. Training is pretty easy. It's more or less you press a button and press record. We've got a crew of editors back here who are doing the stitching and doing the production, but we're asking our journalists around the world not to worry too much about the technical stuff, that's easy, and to think more about what are the stories they want to convey in 360 and what's the best way to tell them. Our journalists are in a lot of places, but they're not everywhere. And if these cameras start to be everywhere, that's great for journalism.
Journalism is one of those professional activities that you actually don't need a certificate, unlike medicine, unlike law. So really anybody can practice journalism. And there have been a number of arguments in the last 20 years about who's a journalist, what's a journalist. But there's still a sense of core ethical principles behind journalism. Elements about accuracy, fairness, truth. Issues like objectivity are certainly now up for discussion, but that's what makes journalism what it is. It's a constant reflection of those principles and an understanding that while you don't need a certificate, there are these shared principles that are about factually driven stories to inform people.
The trend of citizen journalism is something I think really important for journalism in general. Smart News Agency, a Syrian independent news agency that we launched in 2013 because there was a lack of credible news coming from Syria. Telling stories from Syria is very important, especially in a context where you have a lot of nations involved in the war in Syria and each one doing its own propaganda, its own storytelling. And we would like to tell the stories as we are living it, as Syrians. So we thought that, okay, we could do a movie in virtual reality so the people could see with their own eyes what's happening inside Syria.
The Syrian Civil Defense, also known as the White Helmets, are a group of approximately 3,000 volunteers. Before the war, the White Helmets were ordinary civilians. But today they are ambulance drivers, paramedics, and search and rescue personnel. When a bomb hits, the nearest unit of White Helmets is dispatched.
We were not able to do news with VR. Now there's a revolution in the world of VR, which are these new type of cameras, which are much simpler with two cameras only. They stitch the images almost automatically. And in the same day, have the image edited and published in our news agency. We started as citizens, and we believe that journalists can still change something. So we're activists of journalism. We believe that doing journalism is just not only for informing, but also to try to change the world. What we need to do is to be very careful on the usage of these new technologies, the way that is so empathic that it could be used very easily for propaganda. For now, we're setting up our own rules.
The fear that people have about new technology like social media or the access to VR is exactly the same fears people had about radio, exactly the same fears people had about television. This barrage of imagery that is captured by people that aren't trained journalists. And that throws up a number of ethical challenges, but it also has democratized news. It's democratized imagery. And we adapt and we change, and audiences change, and institutions change, and our ethical principles change.
For journalism, there's all kinds of style books and ethic handbooks. All of this is brand new in virtual reality. Our journalists who are out there with virtual reality cameras are writing the playbooks as they make the work.
I mean, how often do you get a new medium to tell a story, to use as a journalist? That is like incredibly exciting for us.